the story of a former drug dealer.
Do you believe that hell is real, or just a myth created to scare you? That was the question that consumed me for years as I delved deeper and deeper into choices that led me into an endless abyss. For much of my life, I lived in the shadows, thinking I was in control. But in reality, I was chained to something much darker than anyone could imagine. Today, I will share with you the most disturbing revelations I received as I faced, face to face, the hell I created on Earth. What I saw and experienced was not a metaphor or a simple projection of my subconscious. It was real. Every detail, the screams, the smell of sulfur, the grotesque shadows, showed me that hell is not just a place, but a state that begins here, in the now, and that many live without realizing it. For me, it started when I chose the path of destruction, ignoring the signs that life was trying to send me. Have you ever felt like you're falling into a bottomless pit, unable to hold on to anything to rescue you? That was the feeling that consumed me for years as a drug dealer. At first, it seemed like a game. Power, money, and a false sense of control. But little by little, I realized that each wrong choice brought me closer to something much worse than any prison cell. It was as if each sin, each mistake, was a door opening to a place I couldn't escape. The hell I saw was not just a punishment for others. He was my reflection, a cruel mirror that showed me the devastating impact of my actions. Lives destroyed, families torn apart, souls lost because of me. The torment was not just physical. It was spiritual, deep, and seemed eternal. I felt the weight of condemnation, the complete absence of hope, and the certainty that, if I continued on that path, there would be no turning back. Many people believe that hell is a distant place reserved for the worst sinners. But what I discovered is that it is closer than we imagine. It's in the choices we make, the lives we destroy, and the lies we tell ourselves. It begins as a whisper, a seductive call, until it turns into shackles that drag us into the abyss. While I was there, I saw things that defy logical explanation. I saw souls crying out for mercy but unable to escape their chains. I saw demons that didn't need physical strength to torture. A look was enough to suck away any trace of hope. They told me, "You belong with us." And for a moment, I believed they were right. After all, I had caused so much harm, spread so much suffering, that it seemed impossible to escape that fate. But then something happened. Something that made me understand that hell is not just a place of damnation. It is also a place of revelation. There, I realized that each decision has an eternal weight, that no action goes unpunished, and that everyone, without exception, will have to face the consequences of their choices. I saw how pride, greed, and unforgiveness are powerful weapons that trap us in this cycle of destruction. And that's what I want to share with you. Not just what I saw, but the truths that were revealed to me, and that completely transformed my view of life, death, and eternity. As you listen to this account, I invite you to ask yourself, what are the chains that are holding your life back today? Now that you've heard the beginning of this story, I want to extend a special invitation to you. In the comments, leave your prayer request. No matter what your struggle or the weight you are carrying, we are here to pray for you. Prayer has a transformative power, a power that can break chains, bring peace to the heart, and rekindle hope in the midst of chaos. It is through prayer that we connect to God and find strength to overcome even the darkest moments. I know how difficult it can be to take the first step, but believe me, prayer can change lives, just like it changed mine. And together we can create a chain of faith and intercession, because no one needs to face life's battles alone. If this message touched you in any way, leave your like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the next revelations I'll share. This way, you not only support our work, but also help this message reach more people who need to hear about love, forgiveness, and salvation. We are on this journey together, and I will be praying for each of you. The world of trafficking is seductive at first glance. It offers a false shine that attracts those who already carry a void within them that is difficult to fill. I remember the moment I was pulled into this universe like it was yesterday. At first, it seemed like everything I needed. Easy money, power, and an illusory feeling of invincibility. Each day brought a new adventure, new risks, and with them, the adrenaline that made me feel alive. However, what appeared to be a door to freedom and prosperity was, in fact, a death trap. An invisible chain tied me to something much darker than I could imagine. In the beginning, there was the euphoria of having everything I had ever dreamed of achieving. The endless parties, the luxurious cars, the people I surrounded myself with. It all seemed like the reward for finally being in charge of my life. I was no longer an ordinary person. I was someone who made the rules. The problem is, when you believe you are in control, that is exactly when you are most vulnerable. And that's exactly what happened to me. What I didn't know, what no one told me, is that trafficking not only takes your soul slowly, but also throws you into a pit of darkness that you can't get out of. I remember the nights when silence took over after the parties and laughter. The emptiness came with force, like a storm inside me. It was as if something was always lurking, ready to pull me down. I didn't know where that feeling came from, but I ignored it. I told myself it was just tiredness or maybe temporary guilt, but deep down I knew it was something bigger, as if my soul was screaming, trying to warn me that I was going too far, that there was something dark waiting for me at the end of this road. As time passed, the glamour began to fade. What once seemed like an adventure began to become a prison. I began to realize that I wasn't living. I was surviving. Every day was a fight to stay alive, to not get caught, to maintain my position. I was surrounded by people, but I never felt so alone. Distrust was the basis of all my relationships. There were no true friendships, only fragile alliances based on interests. Every smile, every handshake had ulterior motives. And then came the moment when I started to see the consequences of my choices. The lives destroyed by what I did began to take a toll. It wasn't just numbers or unfamiliar faces. There were broken families, shattered dreams, people who lost everything because of the drugs that I helped spread. I saw the suffering, but I convinced myself it wasn't my fault. They chose this path, I told myself. But deep down, I knew I was directly linked to that pain, that destruction. What no one tells you about trafficking is that it robs you of your humanity. It makes you see people as numbers, as obstacles or tools to achieve your goals. And that's exactly what happened to me. I became callous, cold, someone who could no longer recognize themselves in the mirror. And the more I delved into this world, the more I felt that something dark was growing inside me. It was like I was becoming part of something much bigger, something that wasn't human, something that was waiting to consume me completely. The nights began to get longer and the days shorter. I started having frequent nightmares, visions of shadows and screams that I didn't know where they were coming from. I woke up in a cold sweat, with the feeling that something or someone was watching me, but I ignored it. I didn't believe in anything other than what I could see or touch. God to me was a distant idea, something people used to comfort themselves. I didn't need it. At least that's what I thought. Deep down, I knew I was running out of time. Every deal closed, every decision made, seemed to push me further into an endless abyss. But at the same time, I didn't know how to stop. Traffic traps you in a way that is difficult to explain. He gives you everything and then takes everything from you, starting with your soul. And I felt it, even though I didn't fully understand it. What scares me most when remembering that time is realizing how blind I was. I believed I was living the best time of my life, when in reality, I was heading towards hell. A hell that I was creating myself, step by step, decision by decision. I didn't see that I was being used, manipulated by something much bigger, something that wasn't content with just destroying my life but wanted much more. I wonder, as I share this part of my story, how many people are stuck in this cycle right now? How many believe they are in control, when in reality they are being driven deeper and deeper? If you have ever felt this emptiness, this darkness growing inside you, I want you to know that there is a way out. Believe me, I found this out the hard way. If you've been through something like this, or know someone who is in this situation, write in the comments, I believe in redemption. I want to hear your story. Every experience counts, and together we can bring to light what the world tries to hide. The fall doesn't happen all at once. It is subtle, almost imperceptible, and that is why it is so dangerous. At first, I felt in control. Every decision, every step I took seemed planned. But little by little, I began to realize that this control was an illusion. Life in drug trafficking does not offer freedom. It traps you in a web of choices with no return, a spiral that pulls you deeper and deeper, and every day something in me shatters. Everything began to silently fall apart. First, it was the relationships around me. I trusted few people, but that trust crumbled like sand between my fingers. Suspicious looks, broken promises, and betrayals were constant. The same environment that gave me a feeling of power also turned me into someone paranoid, always waiting for the next threat, the next blow. The tension was like a constant weight on my shoulders. I couldn't relax, couldn't close my eyes without feeling like I was being watched, stalked by something bigger than the physical enemies I knew. My nights became unbearable. The emptiness that was once suffocated by money and status now grew like a shadow, slowly swallowing me. I tried to escape it with parties, forced laughter and false moments of joy, but nothing filled that hole. It was like my soul was begging for something I couldn't identify. Trafficking had become a prison, and I was my own jailer. Little by little, the brightness of what I thought was a life of achievement was being replaced by the darkness of choices that carried terrible consequences. I began to see the marks that my actions left on the world around me. The destroyed families, the tired faces of those who lost themselves to drugs, and even the whispers of regret that came from the people who were next to me in this universe. All of this began to weigh like a chain around my neck, pulling me down, closer and closer to rock bottom. And then came the fear, a fear that accompanied me wherever I went. It wasn't just the physical fear of being caught or betrayed. It was something deeper, as if something invisible was always beside me, following me. I felt it in the most unlikely places: a cold wind in a closed room, footsteps in the early morning silence, a weight in my chest that felt impossible to ignore. I thought I was being paranoid, but deep down I knew it was more than that. It was as if the darkness inside me was becoming something tangible, something I could feel. This darkness manifested itself in ways I couldn't explain. I began to have frequent nightmares, visions of places I had never seen before, but that seemed as real as the world I lived in. In dreams, I saw shadows surrounding me, screams that echoed in my mind, and places where the heat and suffering were so intense they seemed palpable. I would wake up in a cold sweat with my heart racing, but I wouldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? The strangest thing is that these nightmares seemed to connect directly to my reality. Things around me started to fall apart. Businesses that were previously closed easily now became complicated. People I trusted disappeared from one moment to the next. It was like everything was falling apart at once, and I couldn't understand why. I tried to ignore these signs. I told myself it was just a phase, but deep down, I knew it was something bigger. Rock bottom is not a physical place. It's a state of mind, a moment when you realize you have nowhere else to go. And that's exactly what happened to me. I found myself trapped in a cycle of destruction, unable to get out or change the direction of my life. Everything I thought I had achieved was nothing more than a sandcastle, about to be washed away by the tide. I was alone, scared, and completely lost. I didn't know who to run to. The people around me were as lost as I was, or worse. No one had answers. No one could offer me anything but more darkness. I became a ghost of myself, someone who lived in the shadow of what I once was, but who now could no longer find meaning in anything. There was a moment, in the midst of all this, when I wondered if what I was experiencing was a type of punishment, if everything that was happening was a direct consequence of the choices I made. I didn't believe in God. I didn't believe in divine punishment or anything beyond what I could touch. But at that point, I started to wonder if I was wrong. What if there was something bigger behind all this? What if I really was paying the price for the lives I helped destroy? With each passing day, I felt like I was being dragged into a darker and darker place. It was as if something was waiting for me at the end of that road, something I couldn't see but knew was inevitable. I asked myself, have I already passed the point of return? Is there still hope for someone like me? If you've ever felt this way or know someone who is struggling with this emptiness, I want you to write in the comments, there is still hope. I want to hear your story, your struggles, and your reflections. We are on this journey together, and every word shared here can be a light in the midst of the darkness. Everything reached a point where I could no longer run away from myself. The life I had built, the choices I had made, everything seemed to converge into a single moment of collapse. I was exhausted, physically and spiritually, but I still struggled with the idea that my life needed to change. There was still that voice of resistance in me, that false confidence that whispered that I was in control. But what happened next shattered all my certainties and exposed me to a reality I never imagined possible. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. I was alone, locked in a room, trying to organize my thoughts as the weight of guilt and fear suffocated me. The darkness felt thicker that night, as if something was in the air, something I couldn't understand but could feel with every fiber of my body. The silence was deafening, and there was a tension in the room that seemed to grow by the second. It was then that everything changed. Suddenly, a cold sensation took over the room. It wasn't the kind of cold you feel on a winter's day, but something much deeper, like it was coming from deep within me. It was an ice in the soul, a feeling that something was approaching, something that was not of this world. The air seemed to feel heavier. Each breath was difficult, and the feeling of being watched became unbearable. It was at that moment that the darkness in the room seemed to intensify. I felt paralyzed, unable to move or look away from the shadow that was beginning to form in one of the corners of the room. It was as if the darkness itself was taking shape, shaping itself into something I couldn't understand but knew was real. My heart raced. My mind raced in a whirlwind of thoughts, but my body felt trapped, as if invisible forces were holding me in place. And then I heard it. It wasn't an ordinary sound, but a whisper, something that seemed to echo inside my mind. It was a deep voice, cold and full of contempt. She said things that I couldn't fully understand, but that carried such weight that it was as if my very soul was being crushed. "You belong to us," was the phrase that was repeated the most, and every time I heard it, something inside me broke. The shadow began to move towards me, and the feeling of despair was so intense that I thought I wouldn't survive that moment. It was as if all the guilt, all the weight of my choices, was materializing in that figure. And then, as if to confirm what I already felt, images began to appear in my mind. It was as if a screen had been turned on inside me, showing every mistake, every life I had destroyed, every choice that had led me to this point. I saw the faces of the people I had harmed. I heard the screams of pain that I ignored. I felt the weight of the consequences of my actions as if they were chains binding my body. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to close my eyes, but it was impossible to look away from that vision. It was as if I were being judged there, at that moment, and the only possible sentence was condemnation. As the shadow approached, something even stranger happened. The smell in the room has changed. A heavy aroma of sulfur filled the air, and the feeling of heat began to mix with the cold I felt before. It was as if the entire environment was changing, transforming into something completely outside the reality I knew. And that's when I realized I wasn't in the room anymore. Everything around me seemed to have changed. The ground beneath my feet was rough, hot, as if I were stepping on hot coals. The air was heavy, suffocating, and the sky, if it could be called the sky, was a sea of darkness cut by an intense red that seemed to pulse like blood. I was in a place I had never seen before, but somehow I knew exactly what it was. I was in hell. What I saw there is difficult to put into words. It was a place of torment, of eternal suffering, where each soul seemed trapped in its own pain, screaming for mercy that never came. I saw things that defied all logic, shadowy figures that roamed the environment, watching every movement like predators waiting to attack. And then, in the middle of it all, I saw myself. It was the scariest moment ever. Seeing myself there, trapped in the same torment as the other souls, was like a punch to the soul. I knew this was a reflection of my choices, a warning of what awaited me if I continued on that path. It was as if I was being shown the naked truth, without filters, without excuses. If you have ever felt that something supernatural has happened in your life, that there is something beyond what we can see, write in the comments, "I believe in the invisible." I want to know your experiences, your stories. Each story is important, and together we can seek answers to things that seem inexplicable. I didn't know how long it had been since I found myself being pulled into that place, but what was before me felt as real as the life I knew. The surrounding landscape was terrifying and took away any trace of hope. The ground I stood on seemed alive, pulsing with an energy that conveyed pain and suffering. It was hot, uneven, and every step I took seemed to burn my feet, even though I couldn't see injuries. The air was filled with a smell of sulfur that seemed to invade my lungs and suffocate any attempt to breathe calmly. All around me, shadows danced in an almost choreographed movement. They had nondescript shapes, but I could feel that they were watching me, analyzing every movement I made. It was as if they fed on my fear, as if my despair was fuel for those creatures. I wanted to run, but I knew there was nowhere to go. On all sides, the scene was the same. Desolation, fire, and screams that echoed like an eternal lament. The scariest thing was realizing that I wasn't alone. There were other souls in that place, lost in a suffering that was impossible to describe in words. I saw people trapped in what seemed like a living prison, screaming for help, begging for a way out that would never come. Some were kneeling, covered by a fire that did not consume them, but that seemed to torture them endlessly. Others were trapped in shadows, being tormented by creatures that can only be described as demonic. These figures did not need weapons or physical force to harm. His eyes, or what appeared to be eyes, conveyed something so dark and profound that it was as if they were devouring souls from within. I felt that the suffering was not just physical. It was something much bigger. It was as if all these people were trapped in their own guilt, constantly reliving the darkest moments of their lives. The weight of the wrong choices, of the mistakes they tried to hide, was written on their faces. It was as if hell were the materialization of everything they had ignored in life. The torment came not just from without, but from within, and that was the scariest part. And then, in the midst of it all, I started seeing flashes of my own past. It was as if hell wanted to show me exactly why I was there. The images were so clear that it was impossible to look away. I saw the people I hurt, the lives I destroyed, the moments when I chose the easy path instead of the right one. Every wrong decision, every act of cruelty stood before me like a cruel mirror. And as I watched all that, I began to feel firsthand what these people felt because of me. It was as if I was living their pain, feeling the impact of my actions directly. I wanted to scream, to apologize, to do anything to ease the pain, but I knew there was nothing I could do. The only thing left was to face it, and deep down, I knew I deserved to be there. Every scream, every tear I saw or felt was a reflection of the choices I made myself. Hell wasn't just a place I'd been taken to, it was a reflection of my own soul. As I walked deeper into that place, I began to realize that time there didn't work like it did on Earth. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. It was as if the torment was made to last forever, without any break, without any relief. There was no end to the despair of the souls around me, and every time a scream echoed, it seemed like the atmosphere grew even heavier. I wanted to close my eyes, but still the images continued. There was no escaping, nowhere to run. And then, in the middle of all that chaos, I heard a voice. It wasn't like the whispers that tormented me before. This voice was different, strong, authoritative, but not in a way that scared me. It was as if the earth itself shook with every word she said. The voice didn't speak directly to me at first. She seemed to be in control of everything around me, as if she were the force that kept the place running. It was a presence that made me feel small, insignificant. When the voice finally spoke to me, it was as if my entire being froze. She didn't ask my name, she didn't want to know who I was. The only thing she said was, "You know why you're here." Those words echoed in my mind, each syllable carrying an undeniable truth. I knew. I didn't need explanations, justifications. What I had seen up until that moment was enough to understand. The vision of hell was not just a punishment, it was a revelation. I was seeing the real consequences of the choices I made on Earth. I was being confronted with the truth I had spent so long ignoring. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. If you believe that our actions have consequences that go beyond this life, write in the comments, "I choose the truth." I want to know what you think, how you see the impact of the choices we make every day. Your every word can be an inspiration to someone who is also looking for answers. Being in that place was like having my soul laid bare, without filters, without masks. Everything I had ignored, everything I chose not to see while living in the world of drug trafficking, was now in front of me with brutal clarity. There was no escaping the truths that this place forced me to face. With every step I took, it seemed like the environment itself was whispering things I needed to hear, revealing not only what that place represented, but what it meant to be there. Hell, I realized, was not just a place of suffering. He was a lesson, a message written with fire and darkness for those who insisted on ignoring the consequences of their choices. It was as if every detail was designed to show the impact of our decisions. One of the first revelations I received was that hell was not an arbitrarily imposed punishment, but a natural consequence of a chosen path. Those who were there were not taken by force. They walked a path that led them to this, step by step, decision by decision. And that truth hit me like a blow to the chest. All my life, I had blamed the world, circumstances, and even God for the choices I made. But in that place, there were no more excuses. Everything I had tried to justify, everything I had rationalized was now naked and raw before me. It was at that moment that I realized that hell begins long before death. It starts with the small choices we make every day, the times we ignore the voice of our conscience, the times we prioritize selfishness and pride above all else. As I walked through that scene of torment, I saw souls trapped in endless cycles of suffering. Some were consumed by pride they could not abandon. Others were chained by regrets they never confessed. It was as if each person was experiencing the most intense and expanded reflection of what they had nurtured throughout their lives. And then I realized that I myself was no different. I was being confronted with my own demons, with the invisible chains I had carried for years, without realizing it. There was a moment when I was forced to look inside myself in a way I never had before. I saw how pride had blinded my vision, how greed had hardened my heart, and how indifference had made me insensitive to the pain of others. I always thought my choices didn't affect anyone but myself, but in that place, I was forced to face the domino effect of my actions. I saw the people who suffered because of the drugs I helped traffic. I saw the families that were torn apart, the homes that were destroyed, the lives that would never be the same. It was like watching a horror movie where I was the antagonist, and there was no way to turn off the screen. One of the most frightening revelations I received was that hell is not only a place of punishment, but also a place of memory. There, people were forced to endlessly relive the moments in which they strayed from the truth. The wrong choices were played over and over again, as a constant reminder that everything could have been different. That's what I felt when I saw my own past being projected before me. Every moment of choice, every decision I made, was being exposed, and the truth was inescapable. I was there because of my own fault. And then came the most shocking revelation of all. A voice, which was not like the others I heard there, spoke directly to my spirit. It was a strong voice, but full of compassion, as if it came from a source I had ignored my entire life. She said, "You had free will. You had the choice. But every time you went your own way, you closed a door to the light." These words echoed inside me as if they were engraved in my soul. It was at that moment that I understood the weight of personal responsibility. Everything I did, every decision I made, was because I chose to ignore the signs, ignoring the opportunities for change, the chances for forgiveness and redemption that were offered to me. And there, surrounded by torment and darkness, I understood that it didn't have to be this way. I realized that at some point in my life, I could have taken another path. But now, the only thing left was the emptiness of the choices I made. As these revelations unfolded before me, I felt something shifting within my heart. It was a mix of regret and hope, as if, even in this place, there was a spark of possibility. I began to understand that the choices I made were irreversible, but that maybe, just maybe, there was still something that could be done. If you have ever stopped to think about the choices you have made in life and their impact, I want you to write in the comments, "I choose to reflect." Share your stories, your reflections, and if this message has touched you, help spread it so that others can also understand that the decisions we make have eternal weight. Let's together transform these revelations into something that inspires change and transformation. Being in that place, surrounded by darkness, screams, and the crushing weight of revelations, seemed to have no end. Time did not exist, and each second dragged by as if it lasted an eternity. I no longer knew who I was. Everything I had carried in life, the pride, the greed, the false sense of power, seemed to have been ripped away from me, leaving only a painful void. I was there devoid of any justification, facing the consequences of my choices. And it was when I thought that there was no more hope, that this torment would be eternal, that something unexpected happened. In the midst of all that chaos, something changed. The temperature of the room, previously suffocating and unbearable, seemed to drop abruptly. It was as if a new presence was emerging, something completely different from anything I had experienced before. The ground, which had previously seemed to pulse with an oppressive energy, now seemed strangely static, as if it was waiting for something. The screams, which echoed incessantly around me, began to subside. And suddenly, I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. A light, faint at first, began to appear in front of me. She seemed to fight against the darkness around her, but at the same time her presence was imposing, as if she could not be contained. This light was not just visible, she was palpable. I could feel her like a warmth that invaded my soul, warming parts of me that had been cold for so long. It was a different heat from the fire that consumed that place. It was not destructive, but restorative. And with that light came a feeling I hadn't felt in years: peace. I didn't know what was happening. My mind was still confused, trying to process everything I had seen, but my heart seemed to recognize that light. It was as if something inside me knew, even without explanation, that this was a divine presence. Then I heard a voice. It wasn't like the other voices I had heard in that place, voices that whispered accusations and lies. This voice was clear, firm, and at the same time full of compassion. She didn't scream, but her presence was so strong that it seemed to fill the entire room. "You were seen." Those were the first words I heard. I didn't understand what it meant at first, but those words carried something I didn't expect to feel: mercy. The voice continued, "You have been called, and even in the midst of your darkness, there is still a purpose. I felt the tears start to fall without me being able to control them. It wasn't the kind of crying caused by fear or pain. It was something that came from within, something that I didn't know still existed. It was as if every hardened part of my heart began to melt under the weight of that presence. For the first time in years, I felt small, not in a bad way, but in a way that made me realize there was something much bigger than me, something I had ignored my entire life. The light began to grow, and with it, images began to appear before me. But these images were different from those I had seen before. They were not scenes of pain or condemnation. They were moments that showed the countless times I was called out, moments when something or someone tried to take me away from the path I was on. I saw the faces of people who prayed for me, even when I didn't know it. I saw situations in which my life was spared in inexplicable ways, but which at the time I attributed to luck. The voice spoke again, this time with more intensity. "You still have a choice. What will you do with her?" Those words resonated inside me like thunder, and I felt completely exposed. It was like every excuse I had ever used was overturned in that moment. I realized that even in hell, even after everything I had done, there was something that still called me back, something that still believed I could be redeemed. And it was at that moment that I fell to my knees. It was not a planned or conscious gesture. It was as if my body had been compelled to bend before that presence. I didn't know what to say, but my heart was screaming. It was a cry of regret, of despair, but also of a hope that I didn't know still existed within me. All I could think was, "I want to change. Please help me change." The light approached, and I felt something I will never forget. It was as if a weight had been lifted from me, as if the invisible chains that had bound me my entire life had finally been broken. There were no grandiose promises, no guarantees that everything would be easy from then on. But what I felt was enough to know that I had been touched, that something in me had changed forever. If you have ever had a moment when you felt something inexplicable, a greater force that seemed to be calling you, I want you to write in the comments, "I felt the call." I want to hear your story, your experiences, and how they shaped who you are. Every word shared can be a bridge for someone who is lost, seeking answers and needing to know that there is still hope. After that moment, when the light enveloped me, and I felt for the first time the weight of the chains being broken, I knew that nothing would be the same as before. I was still in that place, but now there was a clarity, an awareness of things I couldn't see before. Hell, which had once seemed like a final destination, now began to reveal itself as something deeper, a place where the truths we ignored became inescapable. And as I stood there, something began to change within me. It wasn't just the feeling of relief at having been touched by something divine. It was the understanding that that moment had been a rare learning opportunity, and that these lessons were not just for me, but for everyone who still walked the earth, blinded by the same veil that once covered me. One of the first lessons I learned was about the impact of daily choices. I always thought that big decisions define the direction of our lives, but what became clear there was the opposite. It was the small choices, the seemingly insignificant ones, that took us, little by little, towards paths of light or darkness. Every time I chose pride over humility, greed over generosity, I was building a wall between myself and that which was good and true. Hell does not begin with an explosion. It starts as a small crack in the spirit, something we ignore but grows with every step we take in the wrong direction. Another powerful lesson was about forgiveness, both what we offer and what we withhold. I saw with painful clarity how my inability to forgive not only imprisoned others, but also kept me imprisoned. Every resentment, every grudge I carried was like a weight tied to my heart. And more than that, I realized that I too had rejected forgiveness. I always felt that my actions were justifiable, that I was a victim of circumstances, and this made me resist facing the truth. But in that place, I realized that forgiveness isn't just something that frees us. He transforms us. He gives us the opportunity to start again, to be restored. Humility was another lesson that struck my heart like lightning. I spent most of my life believing I was in control, that I didn't need anyone, least of all God. But when I saw what my actions had done, when I felt the weight of the lives I touched in a negative way, I understood how small I was. Humility is not weakness. It's recognizing that there is something bigger than us, something that can guide us and help us even when we don't deserve it. Being humble is making space for this light to reach us, for it to guide us when we are lost. One of the most striking lessons, however, was about purpose. For years, I lived without direction, following what seemed easiest, most profitable, without ever asking myself why I was really here. But at that moment, it became clear to me that each person has a purpose, something that goes beyond themselves. We were made to create impact, to touch lives, to be channels of transformation. And the greatest irony of all was realizing that the same power I used to destroy could have been used to build, to restore. I understood that even the most broken people, those who seem hopeless, still have something to offer the world. And I began to see that the pain we carry can become the strength we use to help others. As these lessons were engraved on my heart, I also realized something that was hard to accept. Time is the most precious resource we have, and I wasted so much of it. I saw all the opportunities I missed, the moments I could have chosen love over indifference, compassion over judgment. Hell not only showed me the consequences of my actions, but also the void left by the things I didn't do. It was like an echo of missed opportunities, each one screaming for attention, but now it was too late. And at the same time, I knew that this vision was not just a condemnation, it was a calling. A reminder that while there is life, there is time to change, to make different choices. All of these lessons hit me with a force that I will never forget. They were not taught with words, but with experiences so vivid and real that it seemed impossible to ignore them. And as I stood there, I was filled with a deep desire to share what I had learned. Because despite the torment and pain, what remained most marked in me was hope. The hope that even in the deepest darkness, there is still a light waiting to reach us, if we are willing to open our eyes. If these lessons have touched you in any way, if you feel like there is also something greater calling to you, I want you to write in the comments, "I choose to learn." I want to know what these words awakened in you, what you believe you can still change in your life. Every story, every reflection you share here could be the beginning of something bigger, a beacon for those who are also searching for answers. After everything I experienced, after every revelation and every lesson I was forced to face, one thing was certain: I would never be the same. Something had changed in me, something profound, as if the layers I had built up over the years had been peeled away, exposing who I really was. The transformation did not come as a glorious moment of immediate relief. It was a painful process, a deconstruction of what I believed I was, and a reconstruction of what I should become. The impact of this change was something I never imagined experiencing, but it completely altered the course of my existence. The first thing I realized right after that supernatural experience was the weight I was carrying without realizing it. It was as if every wrong decision, every mistake, every selfish choice had turned into invisible baggage that I carried with me wherever I went. When I felt this weight being lifted off of me, it was like breathing for the first time after years of suffocation. It wasn't just a physical relief, it was something spiritual. It was as if my soul had been washed, renewed. But at the same time, along with this lightness came a responsibility. Now I knew the truth. Now I understood what was at stake, and there was no going back to the person I was before. This transformation began to shape not only who I was, but also how I viewed the world around me. Before, I saw people as obstacles or tools. If someone couldn't help or benefit me, they simply had no place in my life. But after this experience, I realized how wrong I was. Each person who crosses our path carries a story, a pain, an internal battle that we often cannot see. I began to see humanity in a way I never had before, as something fragile but incredibly valuable, and it completely changed the way I interacted with others. For a long time, I lived as if I were impenetrable, as if nothing could reach me. I convinced myself that I was strong, unshakable. But deep down, I was broken, and this experience showed me that admitting your vulnerability is not weakness, it's strength. It was only when I allowed myself to recognize how lost I was that I could begin to find a way back. And in the process, I realized there was something even more powerful than the transformation itself, the impact it could have on the people around me. When I came back to my life, after everything I saw and felt, I knew I couldn't just go on like before. The impact of the transformation began to manifest itself in small changes, but which had enormous weight. I started asking for forgiveness, not just from God, but from the people I hurt. It was one of the hardest steps, because admitting that you hurt someone requires a level of humility that pride always tries to stifle. But each request for forgiveness was like removing another stone that was holding me back to the past. I also started to see opportunities where before I only saw problems. What previously made me feel trapped, the consequences of my actions, the scars I left, was now a chance to do something different. Instead of avoiding the pain of the past, I began to use it as a learning experience, as a testimony that transformation is possible. It gave me a purpose I had never felt before. I no longer wanted to just survive. I wanted to live in a way that reflected the lessons I learned. And this transformation did not go unnoticed. People around me started to notice something different. At first, there was resistance. A lot of people suspected it was real. And honestly, I don't blame them. When you spend years living one way, it's hard to convince someone that you've truly changed. But over time, I realized that I didn't need to prove anything. True change does not require validation from others. She speaks for herself. And as people saw how I acted, how my choices and attitudes reflected the person I was becoming, they began to believe. This transformation also brought something I never expected: reconciliation. People that I thought I would never see again, that I had pushed away with my actions, began to get closer. It wasn't easy. It didn't happen overnight. But, little by little, I realized that my transformation was impacting not only my life, but also the lives of those around me. It was as if the cracks I had caused were beginning to be filled by something bigger than myself. If before I lived to accumulate power and money, now I saw that true wealth was in the connections we built, in the lives we touched. And for me, that was the biggest lesson of all. Understanding that our transformation is not just about us. She is a testimony, a beacon for those who are still lost, for those who need to know that there is hope, that change is possible, no matter how deep we have fallen. If you believe that it is possible to change, that the impact of a true transformation can reach even the darkest corners of our lives, write in the comments, "I believe in change." I want to know what this message awakened in you, what you believe you can still transform into your own story. Your words could be the push someone else needs to start changing too. After everything I've experienced, every lesson learned, every weight lifted, and every truth revealed, one thing has become clear. The power to change our story is within our reach, but it depends on one decision, one step, of faith that only we can give. Transformation is not something that happens by chance. It demands surrender, it demands reflection, and above all, it demands that we recognize how much we need something bigger than ourselves. It was this realization that brought me here today, to share with you not only what I learned, but to invite you to take this step along with me. I know how easy it is to get lost in the chaos of everyday life, to ignore that voice that whispers in the back of your mind, asking us to stop, to rethink the direction of our lives. The truth is that many of us live on autopilot, guided by choices we don't question, while we accumulate hurts, resentments, and fears that hold us back without us realizing it. And that's exactly what hell showed me, that it is in this state of indifference, of disregard for what really matters, that we begin to build our own spiritual prisons. Maybe you're feeling this way right now. Maybe, deep down, you know that something needs to change, but you don't have the strength to take the first step. And I understand. I've been in that place, looking into the abyss and thinking it was too late, that there was no hope for someone like me. But what I learned is that while there is life, there is opportunity. While you are still breathing, there is still time to reconnect, to begin to rebuild what has been broken. Reflection was one of the most powerful tools in my transformation process. Sitting with myself, confronting my choices, my failures, my fears, was painful but necessary. And that's what I want to propose to you now. A moment of sincere reflection, without excuses, without distractions. Close your eyes for a moment and ask yourself, what is holding me back? What do I need to change? Where do I need help? These questions may seem simple, but their answers have the power to change everything. And here comes prayer. Many people think that praying is something complicated, that it requires beautiful words or magical formulas. But the truth is that prayer is just a conversation, an act of opening your heart and recognizing that we need help. When I was in that dark, directionless place, it was prayer that pulled me back. Not an elaborate prayer, but a desperate cry from someone who knew she could no longer walk alone. And God heard me. Even at rock bottom, even with so many mistakes, He heard me. Prayer is an invitation for something bigger to come into your life and start working on the areas that you cannot change alone. It is an act of humility, of recognizing that we do not have all the answers, but that we are willing to seek the right direction. And I know from experience that when you pray sincerely, something changes. Maybe it's not immediate, maybe you don't see results the same day, but a seed is planted, and that seed has the potential to grow and transform everything around it. If you've never prayed before or don't know how to start, don't worry. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just say what's in your heart. It might be something like, God, I don't know what to do. I feel lost, but I'm here, asking for your help. Guide me, show me what I need to change, give me strength to continue. These simple but sincere words have a power you can't imagine, and I want you to know that you are not alone. When you leave your prayer request in the comments, you are creating a chain of faith and support. There's something powerful about sharing your struggles and knowing that other people are praying for you, even if you've never met them in person. This is how we build something greater, something that transcends the barriers of time and distance. Maybe you're thinking right now, could this really make a difference in my life? The answer is yes. But change starts with a decision. It starts with you recognizing that you don't need to continue carrying the weight alone, that there is a path of hope, of restoration, and that it begins when you take the first step. If this message has touched you in any way, if you feel that there is something in your life that needs to be transformed, I want to invite you to reflect and pray. And if you can, share in the comments what's on your heart. Write something like, "I choose transformation," or "I need help." Whatever makes sense to you. Your words, your story, can be the beginning of transformation, not only in your life, but in the lives of other people reading it. Let us together, step by step, prayer by prayer, discover that even in the darkest moments, there is a light waiting to guide us home. If you've made it this far, it means that this message has somehow touched your heart. And we really want to know how this has impacted your life. Your story, your emotions, and your reflections are extremely important, not only for us, but also for the thousands of people who are reading the comments, looking for a word of comfort, inspiration, or even direction for their lives. Therefore, leave your comment below with the phrase, "I felt God's voice in this video," and share how this message spoke to you. Remember that when you share your experiences, you are not only telling something about yourself, but also being a channel of hope and transformation for other people. Often, your word can be exactly what someone needs to hear to keep believing, to not give up, and to find the strength needed to take the next step. And if this message resonates with your heart, I ask that you help us reach even more lives. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that transforms, strengthens, and inspires. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of the next videos. Every message we prepare here is made with the purpose of bringing light to the darkest areas of life, and we want you to continue to be part of this journey. Also, don't forget to leave a like. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it has a huge impact. It is through your support that we are able to reach more people and spread this message to those who need to hear it most. When you like, comment, and share, you are telling the world that the message of transformation, hope, and faith still has a special place in our hearts. And before I close, I want to remind you that this journey doesn't end here. On the final screen of this video, you will find the next content that we have prepared with so much care to continue strengthening your journey. Don't forget to watch. It may be that there you find answers, comfort, or even confirmation of something that God is already speaking to your heart. May God bless your life powerfully. May He strengthen every area in which you need help, and may He renew your faith day by day. We are on this mission together, and you are part of something much bigger. Thank you for being here, for opening your heart, and for allowing us to be part of your story. Let's continue this journey together.